And cash is, controlling cash in a cash environment is very difficult. And one of the reasons is what I just told you about. If I throw 20 bucks on the floor, who owns it? And it's very difficult to figure that out. So the volume of cash in transaction, it can be very hard. And then cash is variable to the person who owns it. So controls around cash, we have to make sure that we put in. So cash can involve two ways. Cash received at the point of sale, okay? You go into any store, they receive cash, right? And then the other way is cash received remotely or electronically. Now, there are some businesses that are just cash businesses, and that makes it even harder. And theft at those are very high. So just a couple types of places that you got to think about. So anyone, now I'm not from St. Louis, so when I first moved here, some things that are very St. Louis born or norm, like things like CYC Sports, I did not understand what that was when I came here, let alone when you used to be able to like have beer at CYC Sports, and at 10 o'clock in the morning you're having a beer at a CYC Sports. So think of all the money that goes in and out of those concession stands at these young kids' games. So when you have those games, and it's cash business, now they are slowly converting a lot of these places to taking credit cards. But up until recently, even the big ones like the Afton Fields and the Kirkwood Fields and the Chesterfield Fields, they didn't take credit cards until the last couple years. All of it's cash. All right, cash coming in. How do you know if someone's stealing from you? Well, yeah, but CYC, do they put cameras in at those places? I can tell you at some churches they're up, but they're not running. They're fake cameras, all right, because they've been stolen from. We had trouble at Hageman, which is where my kids went to school, they don't go there anymore, with a parent taking. We couldn't prove it. The same parent did it several times, but we could not prove it because it was cash. It's very hard to prove the theft of cash. We knew it was her because the cash always disappeared when she was the one sitting there. So we knew it was her. And then to make it even more, cash disappeared from the church where I ran the concession stand. And my husband was the one who said, remember in October when they called you in Chicago and a couple $100 was missing and they wanted to know if you had come up and opened the stand? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, did you ever find out who was working? It was right after cash went missing again from the kids' school. I'm like, I didn't. And so I found out who was working, and it was the same lady. So the same lady that had taken from the kids' school that we could not prove was working the weekend that the cash went missing from the concession stand.
Did you guys confront her?
I didn't. No, I didn't, but I told the deacon. I said, listen, I can't prove it, but I can tell you the money went missing from the church. From the kids' school. The money that we went missing in October, this individual was working. And so I let him handle it. Basically, we just didn't schedule her to work concession stand anymore. But you can't prove it. There's no cameras. What do you do? Another bigger example, because all of that amounted to like probably $400, right? A bigger example in South County back before my kids were playing, but they told me I could use this example, was Mary Mother Fields flood. If you're down from South County at all, at Merrimack Bottom and 55, those fields flood or they don't flood. It's either high or dry. So we used to have, I guess my understanding is they used to be gorgeous fields. And then once the flooding started, the changes that were made in Valley Park, ripple effect down, and these fields now flood. And so they used to do big soccer tournaments down there. So then once the field started flooding, they couldn't do the soccer tournament. So they made it a deal with another church who had a lot of soccer fields that we would have our soccer tournament there, and we would get the registration and we'd split the soccer concession for having their fields. And they said, okay. So at the end of the tournament, they gave half the concession check to Mary Mother, and I can't remember, but it was something like $1,500. And they said, well, we're supposed to split it. And he goes, we did split it. It was $3,000. And our person in charge of it was like, someone's ripping you off. And they're like, what are you talking about? He goes, we make $2,000 in concession at our trailer. And for anyone that hasn't been to Mary Mother, we have a trailer. That's all we have. And this specific place has a big building. At the time, you could sell beer. They have a golf cart that goes around to their 10 different fields. They had margaritas. They have a grill. They have everything. They should have made $5,000–$6,000. And the individual's like, really? And they're like, yeah. They pay someone to run their concession stand. I volunteered for almost 10 years to run our concession stand. So they looked into it and found out the individual running their concession stand had been stealing from them for years. And they were paying him. So they were paying him and he was stealing from them. So what happened at the end of the night or end of the shift at this particular church was the individuals that volunteered, the parents that had to work, would finish up and they'd clean up, do whatever, and they'd leave. This individual would count the money and turn it into the church. All right? Sounds right? Except for the fact that he was the only one counting the money and he was the only one turning it into the church. There was nothing. Well, at Mary Mother, that's what I do too, and that's what the other managers do, but we rotate it so every weekend someone else is in there counting the money and turning it in. So it might be 200 this weekend, 250 next weekend, but it's always kind of, this individual does it every weekend and gets paid. So what they do now is, besides fire that guy, they pay somebody, but the two parents that work and every shift count the money. Then they leave and they give a total to the office. That person who's being paid counts the money, takes the money, and gives it to the office. And those two totals better match. So they have an independent verification. Doesn't take another 10 minutes by the last two parents to count up the money. But they would have had no idea they were being stolen from if this soccer tournament didn't happen. And they estimate that it was probably anywhere from $1,500 to $1,000 a month that this person was taken for years. Another example, and this was years ago, but there was a church in Illinois and we're talking about rationalization here. A lady was working in the church and her son was sick. And she was the one who took the offering and counted up and deposited. Well, the medical bills started piling up, so she started taking a little bit from the offering plate. Her full intent was to pay it back. But she kept taking from it because son wasn't better, the bills kept piling up. By the time they figured it out, she had taken $25,000. Now, the church did not press charges. She actually still works there, and she's paying it back as she works there. But that's an example, where rationalization was there because of extreme circumstances. It wasn't someone with bad intent like at the concession stand or the parent at the kid's school. It was someone that was in dire straits and rationalized the need because she didn't know what else to do. So people take for a lot of different reasons. And the only way to stop all of them is to take out the opportunity. And this woman at the church had the opportunity. A lot of churches do. My parents go to a bigger small church in Bonne Terre. 2 people count the money. After church, 2 people collect the money. They put it in, something. And then they go back up Monday, and they count it Monday morning, and they take it to the bank. 2 people. And it is rotated every month. 2 people count it.
We just had that at our church. A wife and husband stole a lot of money
From
from
your
our
church?
church.
And the wife and husband were counting it together,
Mhm.
weren't they?
Yeah.
And see, the bummer is you think, okay, well, that's great. The wife and husband, then it's not 2 other people coming up. But then it's the wife and husband. It's cahoot, yeah. And like my brother goes up and he takes turns at our church, but it's 2 separate people. So it's at church on Sunday, but then we have a Saturday service. So every Saturday at 5:45 he has to run up there, and it starts driving my sister-in-law a little crazy, but he just takes his turn and he meets somebody else out there. They grab it, they lock it up. It takes him 15 minutes, but 2 people have to be up there, and husband and wife are not the best combination to do that, and that sucks. It sucks. So what do we do? Well, we can't fix everybody because there's different reasons. Now, were they in dire straits, or was it just them not being good people?
The husband owns his own company.
Yep.
They're well off family. And maybe it's because they were stealing from the church.
Maybe that's why they're well.
But
They could be better off because.
years.
So that makes me, so I told you what corruption, and then we had asset misappropriation, we had financial fraud. Does anybody know what the difference between those and embezzlement is? Okay, embezzlement's when you take from within your own company. Okay, so you're taking money from within. So a lot of times it's somebody who's taking, now that's that's not what they were doing because it was hidden from the church, but it just made me think about that too. So when you're embezzling funds, you're taking from within your own company and you're keeping them. So that's not an Enron, because what Enron was doing was they were financial statement fraud and asset misappropriation. So. All right, so what the primary internal control goal for cash is to make sure that the money gets into the bank. Because until the money gets into the bank, it is not good. Right? It's not safe until it gets into the bank. At the middle school where my kids are, they just had a big kickball tournament, and the PTO president sent a text saying, can anybody get to the bank? I don't like having this much cash, because the kids sign up, it's $15 to play, and the bank doesn't open until 9, and I don't like having it with me. I locked it in the safe at work right now. Like, she didn't want that cash sitting in her car, she didn't want it sitting in her purse, and the bank's open from like 9 to 4, and she's like, I'm not comfortable with this much cash. So the goal is always, for whatever organization it is, get it in the bank. Once it's in the bank, the cash is safe. So the next couple slides are just a little, talks about how you segregate the duties between the cashier, the supervisor, and the accounting department. This is in a perfect company that has those 3 rules. All right? Obviously, the ones that I just talked about with the cash, they don't have those rules. All right? The church didn't have those rules. The concession stand doesn't have those rules. And even if you take it to an Afton or a lost my train of thought, or Kirkwood, like those bigger concessions, they don't have those rules, right? The only way that at a concession stand type place that you're going to have that is if you can't disperse the food until you hit some type of electronic keypad, right? So at like a McDonald's, you have to ring in your order, right? So as soon as it's rung in, they know that you have to have the cash in the door. But if you think about an Afton or a Kirkwood, they're just typing it in. They could still hand you a candy bar without typing it in. So you want to make sure things are scanned and they collect the payment, all right? And then this person's job is to make sure that what's in the register matches the cash and to store the cash and get the bank deposit. And then the accountant is going to be, or accounting department's going to be comparing everything. Yeah, back up.
So at the restaurant that I worked at, the drawers started being short, like a significant amount, and then the manager had to be up there the whole time, like cashing people out. Do you think that's bad?
That the drawer's short all the time?
No, because the manager counts the money at the end of the night as well. So do you think it's bad for him to go and cash people out the whole night? You know what I'm saying?
I would say long term, it's probably not the right solution, but if they're trying to figure out why the drawer is short all the time, it's probably the right short-term solution. Because you probably don't have a lot of other short-term solutions. Right. If it stops because he's doing it, then you know that someone either can't add or someone's pocketing money.
Right. Okay.
So that's probably what they're trying to figure out right now. Because it still continues to be short, someone's got to be pocketing money before it even hits there. All right, so this is an example of what you would do if it is short. So you can see cashiers rung up $6,100, but you only had $6,097 to deposit. So you're short $3. Is a company going to care if you're short $3 on almost $6,100? No. All right, so the journal entry is going to be just a cash shortage of $3. As I mentioned at the very beginning of class, every company is going to have a threshold. What's considered okay to be short? And they're going to just write it off as a cash shortage. Right? They're not going to sit there and be like, why am I short $3? Okay, you're going to have a threshold that you're going to be like, your bank's off a little bit. I used to do, when I was in school and had time, I used to have an Excel document that I kept to the penny. And then it was to the dollar. And then it was to the $10. And now if I look and I'm within 50 or 60 bucks of my thing, I'm like, close enough, I just added wrong somewhere, or I forgot to put the gas in somewhere. And most people still don't keep a budget like I do, but that's because I'm an accountant, and that's kind of what I do. So, but your threshold is based on your money that you have coming in the door, right? Now, when you got cash coming from a remote source, companies are paid remotely, it's going to go directly in. So this is a cash remittance. All right, the amount enclosed is $75.10. That actually is going right to your bank. That's the way people want to be paid. How many of you guys pay something automatically? Your cell phone bill, your electric bill, anything like that. When you first sign up for something new, they ask you, do you want to do auto pay? How about well, if you don't pay your tuition, but even now you get, for school, don't you get a card? And that's how they put financial aid goes on a card, everything goes on a card. They want you to put it on a card, they want you to pay with a card, they don't want cash, right? A lot of companies now, new employees, they will not let you get a paycheck, right? They want to do electronic deposit, right? Going away from a cash world because cash is so hard to keep track of. I almost never have cash, which is not always a great thing. I actually got $3 in my phone right now because my little guy owes me $5, so he paid me $3. And so I have $3. That's a lot for me to have $3. But then you go somewhere that's only cash, like a football game, and you got to have money. So companies want you to pay this way. Number one, they don't have to have employees to sit there and take the money. And number two, cash isn't coming in. They don't have to worry about cash taking, not just checks, but cash coming in. And then a lot of times you'll get some type of confirmation. I get confirmation all the time saying your electric bill's been paid, your student loan has been paid, or what other payments. I'm kind of waiting where even like doctors, they try to make you pay when you go in for a procedure ahead of time, which I always say no. Then they send you the bill, but then they encourage you to pay online. All right, so instead of, that's what I just walked right into this, so they don't want a check, they would rather have you do an electronic funds transfer, which we call EFTs. All right, and then there are some companies that still have petty cash. This is talked about a little bit in your book. We don't talk a lot about this. But petty cash, now most companies will have something called a P card instead of actual petty cash. When I first started working, there was a petty cash store. If someone went to get lunch, they'd grab petty cash. If someone needed stamps, they would buy stamps out of the petty cash store. Companies don't have that as much as they used to have, all right? Because most employees that work in a company like that have a purchasing card, and they can just go buy it on the credit card. But in rare cases, they will use this petty cash system. The primary goal is just to make sure that the people who are doing things are doing them with proper authorization. And if you have a purchasing card, that means you're supposed to be able to use your purchasing card. Right. And then it also takes away from having to track receipts. Yes? Petty cash? It's a small amount of money that companies keep on hand for small bills, like going to lunch or buying stamps or gas bills. Like my husband, when he started his new job, they reimbursed for gas. Well, he didn't get the credit card right away, so he had to keep his receipts until he got the card. And so he had to keep every single receipt, all of his oil change receipts. Then he had to turn them in, and they wanted them on a weekly basis, and then they reimbursed them. Well, the person that did that had to fill out the paperwork, and then he had to keep all the receipts. That takes a lot of time of someone's job. If you just give them a credit card, the credit card comes in, they're authorized, they pay it. Now all you have to do is check what's on the credit card bill. So much easier. Now there was a company that when I was working for Reuben Brown that we had an audit, and they had $300,000 in their petty cash. Does that sound like a lot of money? They were in bankruptcy. And so no one would deliver to them unless they paid in cash. So they had to have cash enough to cover. And they were a manufacturing company. So they had big deliveries. So can you imagine the controls around their petty cash? It was like being at a bank. So it was locked in a vault. There were, I think, 4 individuals who could access it, but they could only access it with 2 sign-offs at the same time. And the reason they had 4 is because people worked different shifts. So they had to make sure that they had somebody there, with 2 people there at all times that could access the petty cash. So it is still used. You just don't want to have it for those reasons. All right. This I'm not going to go through, but if you're curious about the process, it also has the control principle over here that kind of goes through the internal controls. If you're not sure how the process goes of ordering things, this goes through from the purchase requisition, which is how you buy something. It turns into a purchase order. When it comes in the door, the receiving report, the supplier invoice, and then how you pay it. And then it shows you how it should all be different things. Notice there's only 2 segregation of duties. Segregation of duties is the accounting department at the end when they pay it, and notifying the accounting department that yes, we got the document. The rest is a lot of documenting the procedures. So that's the whole process, and you should have all these wonderful things when you go through purchasing something. And then the next couple go through in detail, which I am not going to do, but it goes through in detail the process of paying by check. And we're not going to do that, but you can see this next couple steps. If you haven't been in the workforce or you haven't been in a company that does that, I recommend you go back and just kind of look how that process goes if you're not familiar with it, just because I think it would be beneficial to you from a standpoint of controls. All right, if you know how this process goes, then you're fine. But this is just the whole process from the time that you purchase it until the time that it gets paid. All right, we work from the standpoint of when are we paying it? All right, we're paying it with that invoice. All right, now companies pay their employees through EFTs, and that's called direct deposit. And that's what I alluded to already to you guys, that a lot of companies won't even pay you with a check anymore. All right, they want to pay you by direct deposit because it saves them money. All right, it saves them money because they don't have to print a check. It saves them money because they don't have to distribute the check. All right, and all they have to do is have something queued up with the banks, and you get paid usually at midnight the night before, so it's also faster. It also makes sure that the banks don't actually overpay or underpay an employee, and also usually makes sure that you don't have fictitious employees. And one of my favorite audits that I did was a payroll audit I got to do, where we went out and did a surprise audit of the public schools, and we went out and handed their payroll checks to everybody. And at the end of the day, we had extra checks that went to people that weren't there. All right, now that's where the public schools said we're done, right? They didn't ask us to continue, kind of like when we did a travel and entertainment audit at Enron, and we found significant problems with an individual that was higher up. They said, okay, thank you, and that's when we stopped. When you're doing internal audit, there's no one to report to, right? You report to the company. So those were both internal audits. But the payroll audit, there was at least one person that did not exist. Now you usually have to have a Social Security number, and in order to have a bank account, you have to have a Social Security number. So in order to get paid, and if they do direct deposit, you have to have a bank account that's linked to your Social Security number. So it reduces the risk of paying someone that's not actually working for your company. So it's much safer. And then the petty cash I was talking about, they reimburse employees for small gifts. All right, so for the bank, restricting access, document procedures, and independent verification. And that is what a bank reconciliation is going to do. So one of the things that we did not do